All right, welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're cracking open what honestly feels like a true medical mystery sometimes, the incredibly nuanced and sometimes frustrating world of hepatic failure coding. We're going to be drawing on some absolutely fantastic insights from James F. Salter, IV. He's a coding and regulatory education specialist. Basically, we're going to map out exactly how to decipher the clinical clues left behind in a patient's chart. So grab your coffee and get ready to really sharpen those investigative skills. Let's be real for a second. Have you ever found yourself staring at a medical record and just second-guessing whether a hepatic case is acute, chronic, or maybe something lingering right in between? You know the feeling. You are definitely not alone here. It's honestly one of the most relatable pain points in our field. Coding liver failure means sifting through some really messy clinical documentation that more often than not leaves out the exact words you need to finalize the code. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap to unravel this puzzle. First, we'll look at the liver's quiet breakdown. Then, acuity as our coding compass, followed by the acuity timeline. After that, we'll navigate acute-on-chronic cases, hit on 3 vital clinical clues, and wrap up with the power of queries. Section 1. The liver's quiet breakdown. To really get the coding right, we first have to understand the organ itself. The liver, it is an absolute workhorse. I mean, think about what it does. Producing clotting factors, making albumin and bile, filtering out toxins, processing nutrients, storing vitamins, and just generally keeping digestion running smoothly. And this right here perfectly illustrates why coding for it is so complex. When the liver starts to fail, all of these vital jobs get disrupted at the exact same time. The clinical picture gets messy incredibly fast, and frankly, the documentation usually struggles to keep pace with how rapidly the patient's body is changing. Moving right along to Section 2, Acuity, the coding compass. So, to navigate that chaotic clinical picture we just talked about, ask yourself, what is the single most important concept you absolutely must master when you sit down to code liver failure? Think of this as a bit of a mental wake-up call, because if you don't have this one specific concept pinned down, the rest of the chart is just going to lead you in circles. The answer? It's acuity. Acuity is quite literally everything here. Specifically, we're talking about the timing of hepatic encephalopathy relative to when the illness first started. This one single detail determines whether a case gets labeled as acute, subacute, chronic, or acute-on-chronic. This isn't just some minor footnote. It has a direct, measurable, and profound impact on exactly which ICD-10-CM code you're going to assign. Which brings us to Section 3, the acuity timeline. Now that we know acuity is our compass, let's look at the actual map. Notice how neatly these codes align with very specific timeframes. Let's slow down and really walk through this. Day 0 is the onset of illness and jaundice. Now, if encephalopathy shows up within roughly 8 weeks of that onset and there's no prior history of liver disease, boom, that is acute or fulminant liver failure. That falls right under ICD-10-CM subcategory K72.0. If it develops a bit later, say up to 6 months, that's subacute or subfulminant, which also falls under K72.0. But, and here's the pivot, if encephalopathy develops more than 6 months out, we cross over into chronic failure territory. Notice the shift in the code. Those cases are coded from subcategory K72.1. The timeline literally dictates the code. And here is a crucial rule of thumb you'll want to remember. If a provider documents fulminant liver failure, you treat it as acute liver failure for your coding. It's that simple. Fulminant functionally equals acute. So even if the word acute is completely missing from the entire chart, seeing fulminant gives you the total green light to code it as acute. Section 4, navigating acute-on-chronic. Okay, this is the trickiest scenario of the whole bunch, a brand new acute insult hitting a liver that is already struggling with established chronic disease. Since there is no dedicated single ICD-10-CM code for the exact scenario of acute-on-chronic, you are heavily reliant on what's in the documentation. An explicit diagnosis with clear documentation of the acuity level, plus whether a coma is present, makes your job super straightforward. But if that diagnosis is missing, you absolutely have to lean on provider queries to pin down that acuity level. You cannot just assume it, you have to confirm it, for sure. Section 5, 3 vital clinical clues. So if that explicit diagnosis is missing, it's time to put on your detective hat and hunt for clues in the chart. Clue number 1 is jaundice. A failing liver simply cannot process bilirubin effectively. That leads to elevated bilirubin levels in the lab work, which visually manifests as the yellowing of the skin or the sclera, the whites of the eyes. If you see notes about jaundice or spiking bilirubin, mark it down. That's clue number 1. Clue number 2 is coagulopathy. Remember our list of the liver's jobs from earlier? One of the big ones is producing clotting factors. When the liver fails, it just can't make enough of them. In the patient's chart, this is going to show up as a prolonged INR. So, abnormal coagulation labs are a massive red flag that the liver's function is severely compromised. And our third and final vital clue is encephalopathy. This is an altered mental status. It happens because the liver can no longer filter out toxins, so they build up and essentially poison the brain. Remember, this specific clue, when it appears, is the primary marker we use against our acuity timeline to determine if the failure is acute, subacute, or chronic. It's the key to the whole puzzle. Which leads us to our final section, Section 6, the power of queries. So, you've learned the timeline, and you know the 3 clues. But what actual action do you take when you spot those findings, but the provider hasn't explicitly written the words liver failure? Here's your game plan. Step 1. You spot at least 2 of the 3 key clinical findings, jaundice, coagulopathy, or encephalopathy, in the chart. Step 2. You note that explicit liver failure documentation is completely absent. The term just isn't there at all. Step 3. This is your strongest possible signal to issue a well-written provider query. By recognizing the physical loss of liver function through these clues, your query bridges the gap between what's actually happening to the patient and what's written in the medical record. It ensures the documentation accurately supports the final code. So, I'll leave you with this final thought. The clinical clues, the jaundice, the prolonged INR, the altered mental status, they are waiting for you right there in the chart. Liver failure coding requires so much more than just picking a code off a list. It requires deep, investigative clinical judgment. So the next time you're reviewing a complex hepatic record, ask yourself, will you spot the query opportunity before it's too late? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep sharpening those incredible documentation instincts.